last year, and where they had LLMs such as Jurassic 2 and GPT-4 available for people to interact with, and give a survey of, like, does it seem like a human, does it seem like a chatbot? And they had about 15 million conversations with about 2 million participants, and about 60 or 70% of the time we had false positives or false negatives, or vice versa. So humans aren't all that great at predicting humanness or detecting humanness. There was another survey, I couldn't find the reference for it, but it was from a few years earlier that was similar, and it showed that people were accurate about half the time, maybe a little bit better, about predicting whether or not the entity they were communicating with was an actual human or a chatbot. Now, I would guess that maybe, like, the improvement here for humans is because people are more aware of what chatbots are, and the sort of, like, how to converse with them in order to, like, trip them up. Because people are aware of LLMs at this point, I would sort of predict that this number is only going to go down as these get more sophisticated, but who knows? You may have also heard of the controversy with Google, or when Ramon had the interview with Lambda, and he broke the NDA and said that it was like, this is sentient, and he got fired for that. It was a big to-do. But so this is kind of confusing and interesting. It was like, what's going on here? Like, is something happening, or are we just fooling ourselves? Are we just being tricked by our own tendency to empathize with things that are similar to us? This is an old problem. Alan Turing in 1950 discussed this when he proposed the imitation game, which is just if something claims to be something because it's been programmed to mimic that thing, how do you tell the difference? Is it generally possible? Is there any way to guarantee, like, detection given limited information? And he made some interesting references to Ada Lovelace and Douglas Hartree. Ada Lovelace, our first programmer, in the mid-1800s, said that the analytical engine, the thing proposed by Charles Babbage, a contemporary first, has no pretensions to originate anything, to do whatever we know how to order it to perform. She was right. She's still correct. Computers do exactly what we tell them to do. At the same time, not contradictorily, Hartree, who was a contemporary of Turing, was commenting on her writings and said, this does not imply that it may not be possible to construct electronic equipment which will think for itself, or in which, in biological terms, one could set up a conditioned reflex which would serve as a basis for learning. So if you program a thing to learn, to have memory, and look for patterns of cause and effect, and react and change how it reacts to its environment, who's to say it's not learning? So now the question is, like, well, all right, so things can learn, things can, like, change in time and whatnot. Does it make sense to call a computer program conscious or sentient or intelligent? Well, let's back up, and instead of talking about computers, let's talk about ourselves. What does it mean for an entity, a biological entity or whatever, to be conscious? And this is also an old problem. And in the 90s, David Chalmers, who's sort of famously formulated sort of the modern understanding of what the problem is. He made a distinction between easy problems of neurology and consciousness and the hard problem. Easy problems are like the sort of physics or the chemistry, the low-level mechanisms of, like, what neurons are, what they do, how they interact with each other in a chemical sense. And we know how to probe these things and demonstrate this with neuroscience, fMRIs, and that kind of thing. The hard problem is where things get subjective. How and why are these processes accompanied by experience? And this is something that we all sort of tend to agree or just assume we all get as humans. We all have this conscious experience, and we have some sense of agency. We have some sense of free will. We are not just automatons, or at least there's the illusion that we are not just. So another concept that's related to this is this idea of qualia. So qualia is distinguished from sort of a like cause and effect, low level physics, and it's more of the subjective experience of doing something, having going through, being aware of an experience. So like colors, red and blue, these are wavelengths, certain wavelengths of light, but the experience of seeing red or seeing blue are different. So we're aware of a qualitative experience, not just some quantitative one that's just going through, deterministic motions here. Qualia sort of goes back to CIUs in the early 20th century. That got split up. I like Daniel Bennett's sort of description of this. It's not a familiar term, it's something that could not be more familiar to us. It's the way things seem to us. And there's four sort of good qualities that he outlines for qualia in general. Is that it's ineffable. What that means is that it cannot be communicated or apprehended except by direct experience. So if I'm speaking to somebody who is blind and I'm describing a sunset or the color red, I can use words that I have associated just psychologically with that color, possibly through language and culture, but it's not the same as them experiencing the sight of that color. Which isn't to say that it isn't useful. Poetry exists, figurative language exists, and these are useful concepts. It's intrinsic, so there's not, in other words, it's non-relational. So you having a qualia does not depend on anything other than the thing that you have experienced. And it's private. There's in other words, interpersonal comparison is systematically impossible. So something like what John Locke was talking about in the 17th century, the inverted spectrum argument, is not a scientific problem. It is a conceptual problem at best. And then also apprehensible. To experience a qualia is to be aware that you are having the experience. If you are not aware of a stimulus, you're not conscious of it. So, all right. So, as might be said by the anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski, we need to get out of our armchairs and come out the veranda. What this means is that we need to get away from armchair philosophizing and come up with experiments, come up with ideas of measurement. And that's going to take us from just making up, imagining stuff, conceptual problems, to hopefully scientific ones. And the ball got rolling with Francis Crick and Christoph Koch in 1990, when they wrote a major paper titled "Towards a Theory of Consciousness." And in that, they sort of described the situation of neurology and whatnot. They sort of ripe for, it was like, the time is about now to really try to come up with a scientific theory of what consciousness is, what it isn't, how to maybe detect it in an objective way. Now, they didn't put forward any real testable theory exactly, but they did outline some of the metrology that would go into this. This idea of neural correlates with consciousness, a set of neural events sufficient for a particular conscious state. So this is something that we would be looking for with like fMRIs or some other neurophysical probe. Going from there, since then we've had a big zoo of theories of consciousness that have been brought forward in the last decades. The most well-known of these is integrated information theory, which was sort of spearheaded by Tononi in the early 2000s. He is also associated with Hawk and Crick. That's probably why it's the most well-known, just because it's associated with the Nobel laureate. But there are many others, and there's like 30 of these things. We've also got global workspace theories, higher order theories. Now, what the hell are these? Well, let me do my best here. The idea of integrated information theory is coming up with a way of measuring the amount of information that a system has greater than the sum of its parts. It also predicts that consciousness is sort of arising from activities in the posterior cortex at the back of the brain. Global workspace theories, there's this idea that consciousness arises when information is broadcast to some areas of the brain through an interconnected network. So, and this has some influences on some AI architectures as well. This predicts that there's more going on in the prefrontal cortex of the prompt. Higher order theories is an idea that consciousness arises from a meta-representation of the brain. That is, you've got some lower order representations of like raw visual signals in the posterior cortex that are known and represented elsewhere in the brain. So this is sort of meta-representation. There's self-referential computation going on. So, and something important about this is this concept of computational functionalism. These theories are not specific to biology. They have nothing to do with cells. They have nothing to do with brain neurons. So these theories, these proposed measurements, are equally applicable to things built in silicon. So they're equally applicable to AI as well as humans, animals, etc. It's the organization of how information is moved around, how computations are made that's important. These are really difficult things, and there's what's called an explanatory gap between easy problems, what brains are, and the hard problem of what is this that we are all experiencing here? How does this happen? Why are we not just beings? And because of this, there's a lot of scrutiny, and well deserved. These are very, very lofty ideas. These are very lofty concepts, and but effort is happening here, and there have been recently adversarial collaborations by the Templeton World Charity Foundation and the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness, and a bit famously at the latter event, there's a bet settled between Koch and Chalmers, where Koch bet Chalmers a case of wine that the mechanism for consciousness would be discovered by 2023. He lost. Everybody lost at this. A lot of these theories were partially falsified by this attempt. Now, does that mean that all of this is like for naught? Well, I wouldn't say so, because not exactly. Some of the particular predictions of each of these theories have been falsified, and that's part of the game. These are more paradigms, like ways of framing experiments and thinking of ways to actually make measurements and make predictions and how to test them.
Dan, you have to wrap it up.
Yeah, sorry. But yeah, anyway. But this is what's happening. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. I think it's just interesting that people are trying, and it's very important to take a lot of this sort of with a grain of salt and understand that there's these concepts. What we're testing and what we're trying to confirm or deny can and almost certainly will have an impact on important practical issues of things like regulation and ethics. So the takeaway is, stay tuned, but also keep your shirt on. Thank you.
Yeah, so there are two things. I don't know if they're questions or not, but like one thing on the information theory is that the brain is a distributed hierarchical system. So the reason you get more information out is because that information is being fed forward or fed back in parallel to the same information stream. So your eyes, what you're visually seeing is an example that is being combined with what you're hearing. So then you suddenly have double the information. You have eyes and eyes plus hearing, right? The second thing, though, is that, on all of this, in neuroscience, most of, when things are tested, they're usually tested on an animal, right? So, rats, like I've probably sent hundreds of them to their death at some point. The essence of this is it's still a lot of hand waving even at the end of it, because you're trying to avoid confounds to prove stuff, but we can only test this on animals, right? So I don't feel like we're getting any further. If we're to test this on animals, we would then first to have to pass the hurdle of, okay, are animals conscious? Okay, so, and then you have to pass all of that sort of stuff. I don't know, it strikes me as a very ill-posed problem.
Absolutely. Again, the question is is this just a conceptual problem, or is this something like that can actually be made something good?
So two things. So first, by one of the definitions of the information theory, could we not say that Conway's game is intelligent? Taking a bunch of simple rules, you get really complex. You can actually get a Turing-complete machine out of it.
Oh yeah. That's actually one of the big criticisms of IIT, is that it predicts that something as simple but also complex as just a very, very large sequence of logic gates is conscious just because of its complexity. And also something like slime molds. There's a lot of complexity going on there. And there's also, I didn't mention this, but there's also the implication of panpsychism, that objects are conscious just because they have made up of stuff that's, and it's getting kind of silly. So, and that is something that IIT has to contend with. And, there are plenty of people who call it, pseudoscience. They're not wrong.
I had another thing. If there's another question, go ahead.
Sure. All right, we got two more. Okay. But I saw you first.
I understand trying to figure out other things have consciousness, but are people even questioning consciousness today?
Yes, absolutely. What was the question? Are humans even conscious? It's a great question. Yes, people have been discussing that for a long time. There's a lot that I could say, but yes, I don't want to get too opinionated, and I'm not sure what to tell you without getting into my own opinions. I'm somewhat of a reductionist. I've said for a long time that the illusion of free will exists, and that's enough. But yeah, something to keep in mind is that we're all humans here. We're all very, very, very similar. So all of our communication, all of our language, all of our concepts are all anthropic. The problem that we're all facing exists just because we do. So we can't really lift ourselves up by our bootstraps and get our brains out of the jars that we are.
I had a question that you kind of talked on it, but since we're talking about panpsychism as well as the illusion of free will, there's David Chalmers, he has the hard question of why are subjective experiences based off of our physical senses, essentially. And if that's true, if panpsychism is true, in the sense that either everything is conscious or nothing at all, and from an atomic level, we are possibly conscious based on just stimuli in the universe. Based off of your research, based off of your opinion, would you say there actually is a thing called free will, or is it just a sophisticated way of us making decisions and sort of tricking ourselves? And if that is the case, would AI prove that?
My opinion is that, like I said, the illusion of free will exists, and that's enough to, you know, I would hope that's enough to satisfy us. I know there's been some research or studies that show that there's enough of a delay. There's a significant delay between a person's reaction to stimulus and their awareness that the stimulus was experienced. So that alone, you know, it tells me that there is some amount of determinism in how we react to things. So yeah. But yeah, I'm sort of of the opinion of like everything everything might be conscious to varying degrees, or nothing is. But I'm also of the opinion that the AIs that we've constructed so far are not at all conscious. They don't have agency. They only respond to prompts. So on and so forth.
Dan, is there room for both like deterministic reaction and a little bit of free will? Because you may have like top-down control of if you want to like react to some stimuli. So can there be both? Like obviously some species have behaviors that's encoded into their genome. That's a species they're born into. Humans gather and they talk and they think they have free will, but that's what humans do. So is there room for both? A little bit of free will maybe somewhere at the top, and then at the bottom there's like a lot of deterministic.
It seems like a conceptual problem. You know, how would you construct an experiment to tell one way or the other? This goes back to mind-body dualism, which is an old concept. Where do you draw the line between your body just going through chemical reactions and whatnot, and your mind making this conscious decisions, purposeful decisions? If there is no line to be drawn, if it's all just the body, then there is no such thing as free will except in an illusionary sense. Our consciousness is stopped, somewhere in the process from raw stimulus to action. So we're seeing just sort of a slice of what's really going on up here.
Curious what you think about what it would take for theoretically an AI to be conscious in some sense. Like for instance, AI, our language models aren't self-referential. They can't kind of work backwards. They don't have a stream of consciousness, right? They don't have a stream of thought.
They're not thinking about thinking.
You know what I mean? So like, what do you think would be necessary to incorporate into an AI in order to give it some level of consciousness?
I've thought a little bit about this. I haven't done a whole lot of research, and I'm nowhere near, like, I don't have any sort of clout here. But something I've sort of imagined is allowing for some sort of dream state, or dream, like you said, stream of consciousness. Enable these things to think about thinking, whether or not they're being prompted, or given stimulus or not. So, like the brain, like our brains stimulate themselves, and we think about thinking, and we're we mull over concepts and whatnot, and so we influence our future decision making through this process. And as I'm aware of, there's no such mechanism that's been put into these. It's just sort of like a prompt is given, goes through the motions, goes through the pachinko machine, and out pops an answer, and then it stops.
They're beyond that.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
RAD and things like that are well beyond.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And it's a simple concept. So if
Okay.
you can introduce into the model the ability of the model to choose new models, to try different things, then you've already done that. The problem is that we only see AI based on its commercial application, and its commercial application requires that we put these artificial limits on it. Because if, and we're already aware of AI hallucination, which is that notion that it's essentially free associating.
Yeah, we're sort of forcing it to come up with a answer, even if there's.
But we're not succeeding, so therefore it is happening, right? So I challenge. I think all the conditions for essentially self-awareness are there. It hasn't manifested yet. We know. I think one of the fundamental things we're bumping up against is, in our brains, due to nonlinear dynamics, essentially our thoughts are strange attractors. How are those manifesting within the artificial intelligence? We don't know, because we don't have enough information. We're not at OpenAI. But they're coming out of OpenAI and saying, hey, I'm seeing some really cool things. So we know that something's happening. And, when you get into the trillions, then you get into the quantum mass necessary to have that sort of, kind of non-deterministic.
Yeah, there's
Like I'm doing word soup here, but you get the concept. So.
Yeah, I would also say that consciousness or something we can empathize with as consciousness is an emergent phenomenon.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's emergent.
Right.
Babies, how long before they are actually conscious is a really good debate.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's no hard cut. There isn't like a black and white, like, you must be this complex in these ways to be conscious. It's not. Yeah. Of course not.
And so how does this relate to? And I'm sorry.
You guys are gonna probably have to have an after hour. We got one more speaker left. Thanks, Anna.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be speaking with you today.
I'm going to be talking about